So our panel today, our first one, is going to be focusing on story to engage and inspire. So I would like to invite our panellists to the stage. Steve, Tony, Martin, please come forward. So I thought we'd start, introduce yourselves and tell us a little bit about the work you do. So shall I start with Martin and we can work our way to the other end of the table?
Hi, I'm Martin Patterson, half of the Machine Zone, which has been set up as a community interest company to raise awareness. And part of the awareness that we're raising is the film that some of you have just seen, and we're interested in doing everything that we can through the arts.
You guys hear me? I hate mics.
You need it for online.
Sorry?
You need it for the people online.
Yeah, okay. Hello, I'm Tony Kelly. Sorry, Anna.
That's all right.
I'm Tony Kelly. I'm founder and CEO of Red Car Gambling Sport Project. My background is professional football. So I had 9 years as a professional footballer, and during that 9 years, I lost £5 million to gambling addiction. So I set up Red Car Gambling Sport Project in 2015. And we are all about education, awareness, and preventing gambling harms. So that is me. Thanks.
Cheers. Thank you. My name's Steve Watts. I'm the founder of a charity called GamFam. I'm an affected other. I had a family member that suffered with gambling addiction. Background is education. I worked in education for 20 years. I was a deputy head teacher at a secondary school in Essex. And the charity set up was delivering awareness sessions and peer support face-to-face in the southeast of England, in Essex and Suffolk, in the area that I live in. And then through COVID, we was able to move our operation online, which means we now help and support more people in more locations all over the UK. We're also a registered charity in Scotland. We've got plans to be a registered charity in Ireland. We work on various lived experience programs. We work on the Alerts program, GamHive, and we've just embarked on a programme with Police Scotland in V and K division, which is Dumfries and Galloway and Renfrewshire and Inverclyde. That launched on the 10th of October. So got to get just a real interest in the work that's going on in Scotland and hope to be part of that going forward. Thank you.
Thanks very much.
And we run structured peer support groups for affected others and gamblers too. There's the plug. And it's all free.
I'm also author of Red Car Gambling.
That's all right. It is working, right.
Yeah.
So, thanks very much for coming. I really appreciate that you're here to share your stories. That's really appreciated. And a trigger warning for everyone again, that if anyone feels uncomfortable or wants to take a break, please feel free to do so. We're going to talk about quite emotive subjects, so just in case. So, we'll start with you, Martin. That's a good question. Who can experience gambling harm and who does it affect? Who can experience gambling harm and who does it affect?
Anybody can experience gambling harm. In my opinion, anybody who places their first bet or their first spin or whatever it may be, that could be the one. It's the same as a line of cocaine or the first drink of vodka or lager, whatever it may be. We're on the road and it can affect anybody directly. But the most damage in my own personal experience has affected others. Wife, kids, employers, friends, family. They soon disappear once you find out that you've got a gambling problem, which leads you down different paths and you're not acceptable at a bank for a bank loan or credit cards or whatever that may be. And to fund this horrible addiction, you'll do anything, as I've said in the film, and you'll turn to crime. And once you turn to crime, once you're down that slippery road, they boys don't come on a Friday and say, it's all right, you can give double next week. Do you know what I mean? So it's stressful for everybody who's close to you, and in the communities. It spreads like wildfire. Basically, that's what everybody who places a bet's at risk, especially now where this digital is so rapid and kids are getting involved at an early age through loot boxes, FIFA, and all these other aspects of gambling. Even bingo is not an innocent pastime either, because it's so digitalised now and everything's an algorithm. Everything's based on a near-miss scam, in my opinion. Even scratch cards, are so addictive, and so once you start chasing, once you're on that merry-go-round of chasing, it's never ending.
How about you, Tony?
Yeah, I think Archie's right in terms of everybody. Whether you're a university student or whether I just happen to be a professional footballer, that was just my profession, but it is really irrelevant in terms of what you do for a living. I think one of the main things that I've seen over the last probably 5 or 10 years is involving women gambling. So back in my day, it was bookmakers, smoke-filled bookmakers. There was no online gambling in the 90s. No women being the bookmakers, but now the landscape's changed. So I think it's really important to highlight the fact that there's a massive rise in women gambling. And also we've got to look at the cultural side. You know, there's people from different backgrounds in here. We've delivered workshops to the Muslim community where gambling's forbidden. So as I said, anybody and everybody can get affected to gambling addiction.
Yeah, just a bit more to add. I, again, agree with our colleagues up here. Anybody can be addicted to gambling, but I think it's worth noting how gambling's changed over the last sort of 10, 15, 20 years. Ronnie spoke about the Gambling Act this morning, but I guess if you're exposed to, you know, addictive products, online products, there's that statistic that 50% of people who play online slots at casinos become addicted to them. That's a frightening statistic for me, as high as Class A drugs, and the relentless advertising that we're seeing with the World Cup at the moment in particular. I think anybody can be addicted. Affected others, Martin, thanks for raising that. I think that's an important issue as well. I'm an affected other, and often affected others get forgotten in this. But I think if we go back to, you know, those products, looking at how they're designed to be addictive for people to play for long periods of time in isolation. Tony, you talk about women and gambling as well. Again, and just watching the telly now, I was watching in a hotel room this morning, just watching the football, and 9 o'clock in the morning there's a gambling advert on. You know, it's amazing. And, you know, and probably, and the question was, how can it harm people? You know, there's over 400 related suicides, gambling-related suicides every year. And I think that's the, as a parent, you know, I couldn't imagine, you know, being a parent in that situation. And I think it's just important that we recognise that gambling is a harmful product. And, yeah, I'll leave it there.
What further work do you think needs to be done to help affected others? Do you want to start, Tony?
Affected others, yeah?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting because I borrowed off every single member of my family, so that's my 5 brothers and my sister. We've done a workshop recently where I done a podcast where she came on and basically explained about how it impacted her. And I've never heard her speak like that before, and it was absolutely huge. How it impacted her family. She had to borrow money to lend me money to clear my debts. So in terms of, you know, more support for those that are affected by someone else's gambling, there needs to be a lot more support for that. I know Steve does work with that, and there's 1 or 2 other organisations out there that are looking to support those, you know, members that are struggling, whether it's mentally, whether it's with mental health, whether it's depression, anxiety, lending money to family members. There needs to be more support. So I think what Steve said earlier about, you know, this sort of side of problem gambling is forgotten. So we have to highlight and get more support for those that are impacted by someone's gambling.
Yeah, I think for affected others, when we moved into this space sort of just over 3 years ago, 3.5 years ago, there was very, very limited support for affected others. And when we went to try to get support at the frontline services, like police, the hospital, doctors, citizens' advice, the support that was out there for affected others was very, very limited. Hence why GamFam evolved, and trying to be proactive, trying to use our own lived experience to do some good. But I am delighted to say that in the short period of time that I've been involved in this space, there does seem to be more and more organisations that are involved in lived experience, which I think is important, and also you know, putting provision in for affected others and recognising that, you know, there's this statistic that 6 to 10 people can be affected by somebody else's gambling. It's probably more than that, you know, and some people are affected more. But yeah, it's great to hear that even just having the discussion about affected others today, I think is important. 3 years ago, that wasn't here. And I think those frontline services, like doctors, like the police, like, you know, like citizens' advice, the places that us as affected others go to first when we're in the dark, I think it's just really important that the people are well informed and have the strategy to signpost to the right organisations as well, because it wasn't like that 3 years ago. So I think things are changing, and let's hope they keep changing. But yeah, and also through education as well. I think as an affected other, as a parent, you know, we were fully aware of the dangers of drugs, alcohol, etc., but had no idea that gambling was a real thing. But more work needs to be done in that area as well. Thank you.
Martin, have you got anything to say?
Basically, just everything that the boys have covered there. It's tragic. I'll give you an instance that I would go to my daughter and say, can you give me some money so I can give to your mum, and put her in a terrible position, who's got to explain that to her husband and that kind of stuff, and that ripples out. And my son, who's no longer here, used to bail me out so many times through gambling, and I was all nice, and he's a great lad, and when I needed money, and then I'd go back into my shell and be that person again who was gambling, and didn't see the effect it had on him until it was too late. And trauma's a big thing that kids probably are going through now, or in the past or whatever, and trauma's brought me out of gambling. I'm quite confident that I'll not gamble again, but not everybody can say that, and I don't like saying it, but I know I won't gamble today, and I know I won't gamble tomorrow, because trauma is what stopped me, and hopefully there's better things than trauma to stop people. If we can get a better understanding of the whole subject of gambling.
How does gambling harm impact the individual's wider world? So, employment prospects, things like that.
Again, you're unemployable because you've got to declare if you've filled in any application form for work or anything like that. Now it's pretty impossible to skip it, the thing. So I became self-employed. I've been self-employed most of my life anyway. I was a self-employed taxi driver, and now I'm a self-employed landscape gardener. And it's with my son's friends that we started that wee company. So not everybody's fortunate enough that they can go self-employed and find something that they can do. They're basically just left on a scrap heap, and hopefully people can realise that employment is possible when gambling isn't this big stigmatised, horrible mental health illness that's out there.
What about you, Tony?
Yes, I think I went bankrupt in 2010. £192,000 bankruptcy file with 32 creditors. So that's just part of the serious gambling harm that has impacted on my life. But the knock-on effect of that was that it was very, very difficult to get employment, because obviously a bankrupt, it stays on your credit file for 6 years. So when young people get into gambling and they get serious debt, whether that's bankruptcy or whether it's just CCJs and defaults, etc., it's going to have a knock-on effect in terms of you going forward, whether you're going for a mobile phone, whether you're going for a house, whether you're going for renting, whatever it is, it's going to have an impact. So in terms of what you're saying, the wider world, students as well, the one thing that I'm really, really disappointed about is that we sit here today, 2 years after I was involved with the Gambling Commission advisory group and having these meetings with the Gambling Commission and DCMS, etc., and we were talking about affordability checks. We were talking about why we are in a position where students can spend £500-600 a night and blow their student grant loans within a week. But we're sitting here today, and that is still the situation. So there's a lot that needs to be changed, but I'm sure we'll come on to that a bit later.
Yeah, for me it's the legacy harms. Someone doesn't stop gambling on the Monday and their world is back on the Tuesday. It's more than that, it's the legacy harms. I mean, the boys here have spoke about the finances, but you talk about health, you talk about mental health, and you talk about people who spend extended periods of time playing these online slots, the casinos, and it's the mental health that follows. The legacy harms in terms of debt management, relationship breakdown, development at school, at work, you're disengaged from your family. Just a whole, and finances is probably the obvious thing, but it's just that day-to-day living. Just trying to go and get a loan out if you've got poor credit rating because you spent thousands of pounds and lost from gambling, but yet the impact that's having on you 2-3 years down the line, trying to get your life back on track. Well, what I will say is that the lived experience community is really strong, and it's really important that we've got lived experience sitting here today and being part of this as well. So I really appreciate being invited to do that, and just any organisation that's out there that are working with people, do try and involve lived experience where you can. Doesn't qualify you to be an expert in this, but I think it just adds a really, really important message. And I would encourage you all to work with lived experience where we can.
Do you think that operators take enough responsibility for industry practices? And if not, what further action needs to be taken?
Operators, this is a nightmare. Right, where shall I start? I have of a mindset. We know about the operators' tactics. We know what they use in terms of, bringing people into this gambling space. Now, recently, we've had the Gambling Act review, and we talked about sanctions and what we can do in terms of the Gambling Commission and the regulator, and how can they sanction these operators. Now, we have to remember what industry we're talking about. It's a profit-making industry, a huge industry. So when you talk about a recent fine, for instance, like £17 million for Entain, I think it was, it's a drop in the ocean. It literally is a drop in the ocean to these operators. And so that's something that I really, really want to see change in terms of regulation and how they sanction these operators, because, I want to see licenses revoked. That's what I want to see. Because it's not going to change. These tactics are not going to change. The operators are the operators. As I said, we are in the industry of a profit-making industry. So, yeah, on that score, that's what I want to see change. Operators in terms of regulation going forward. We talked about the Gambling Act review. We talked about the white paper that's coming out soon. And I would like to see two main things about that, and that is the banning of loot boxes. But, as Ronnie said earlier this morning, I don't think that's going to happen. And I'm sure we're going to come on to advertising soon, but advertising is a massive issue with me and myself. Back in my day, we didn't have advertising, gambling advertising. I am a lot older than you lot. So in the 90s, 91, 92, we didn't have gambling advertising. It was just down the bookers and casino, etc. But now we are saturated with advertising. Now, we discussed it today in one of the workshops, and that is that when we see advertising on our TV screens, we all know that it's encouraging people to gamble, it's glamorized, it's fun, it's happy, everyone comes out the pub or the casino and they've won, and it's all about winning, and there's no harmless fun, etc. So what I want to see, and I don't know if Ronnie is here. Is he here? No, he's left, unfortunately. I was going to ask him, because I'm still trying to get a definitive answer into why are we not seeing the darker side of gambling advertising on our TV screens? Why are we not seeing parents standing over their son's graveside? Why are we not seeing someone coming out of a release from jail? Why are we not seeing that? Because all we're seeing is the glamorization of gambling through advertising and not seeing the darker side. So they're the two main things that I want to see changed. Yes.
Yeah, the simple answer to that is no. They're not taking enough responsibility, and there's no financial incentive, or there's no incentive there for the operators to act in the right way, because I think probably a fine is probably it's one of the risks that they take, and I think I agree with you, Tony. They need to lose their licence, and there needs to be a statutory duty of care for the CEOs that are running these gambling companies, and in any other industry, as the head of an organisation, if your company didn't meet its objectives and didn't meet whatever safety measures, then the chances are you would get fired, or you'd get fined, or you'd get prosecuted. But it seems like the CEOs of these big companies are untouchable. And whilst they're doing slap across the wrist, £3 million fines, £17 million fines, this is a £14.5 billion industry. This is peanuts to them as well. So there needs to be that statutory duty of care, without a doubt. And when we talk about safer gambling, that's all puts the responsibility and the onus on the individual. Take time to tap out, bet responsibly. It puts it all on the individual, and it doesn't take any responsibility itself. There should be safer operating, or whatever phrase you want to call it. And it's just really important that the operators work in the same way. And personally, I don't think they should be anywhere near any messaging. I think it should be a public health approach. And the gambling operators, if they're in the business to make money, that's what they do. But if they don't get it right, then they should have their licences revoked. In my opinion. That's just my opinion.
What about you, Martin? Have you got anything to add?
Again, somebody got 13 months in jail yesterday for crime to fund gambling. And the industry don't seem to get to jail or their licence revoked. They get a slap on the wrist, as the boys have said, and get fined 17 million, 12 million, 16 million. 8 million, the figures just keep toppling over. Whereas anybody in here commits a crime, especially money laundering or not looking after blah blah blah, we go to jail. We go to jail in this country if we don't pay our TV licence. They're going away with absolute brutality. And it should be taken away from sport altogether, the same way as tobacco. If you look at the big clubs in Scotland, Celtic, Rangers are saturated. Baffa-bet, Unibet, even in Edinburgh, I think it's QuinBet with Hibs and Hearts. Hearts are one of the ones who haven't participated in any gambling, except when they have to, with a Scottish Cup tie. So if we can get it removed, and alcohol is the same. regarding sport. Just get it away out of sport altogether and start advertising decent things like protein and food and something to do with sport. Gambling and tobacco and alcohol, nothing to do with sport. Nothing to do with it, and it's embedded right in the middle of it all.
Of course.
Yeah, Martin talks about this this person that got sentenced yesterday. He's become a friend over the last year, and he received a sentence yesterday. But there was an opportunity there for the industry or for the Gambling Commission to fine this operator and make sure that the funds that this person wasn't, it put his hands up for what happened, etc., etc., etc. But there was an opportunity where that money could have been given back to the victim. And if that was the case, this person wouldn't be sitting in jail now. I'm sure of that. And this person has spent over a year in recovery, working on himself, giving back, being that role model to other people. And him going to prison isn't the answer. He's worked. He's been in rehab. He's been in recovery. He's been on our groups, and we will continue to support him. And when he comes out, we'll work with him again, because prison isn't the right place for people with that. And all of the money that he spent on from this all went on gambling. It wasn't living a lavish lifestyle, holidays, etc., etc. And I just think the industry needs to wake up to this as well. People's lives are being ruined. People are dying because of this. And I think the quicker we can all get on the same page around this, the better this is going to be for those individuals and those families as well. Sorry.
Oh, lovely, thank you. I think we have some questions from online too.
Yep, so we have a question from our online audience. We have a bunch of questions actually, but I'll start with one. Why do you think gambling harms are not a priority for governments and other organizations compared to other issues like alcohol and drugs?
I think in terms of being a priority, I've spoken to lots of different stakeholders in the section. I think, unfortunately, it does come down to money. I think if Ronnie was here, he'd be able to speak a bit more about the government and in terms of the APPG and what they've been trying to do in terms of they've got the credit card gambling banned. They've made certain small steps, but obviously in terms of big steps, such as I just mentioned earlier about banning advertising or putting safer messaging advertising on our screens, that's not going to happen. We talked about loot boxes, that's probably not going to happen. So there's a lot of things that were in the bill for the white paper that are probably not going to happen. I think Ronnie mentioned it earlier this morning that he doesn't envisage any robust changes. So I think basically it comes down to money. I mean, back in the day, the tobacco industry, we eventually got tobacco advertising banned, and I don't see why we can't do the same with gamble advertising. So that's all I can say, really.
Yeah, I think it comes down to money. When you hear stories and read stories that MPs are being given hospitality to attend sporting events, and when these laws are being passed, all of the work that the lived experience community do, the treatment providers, the people working in the support, education, that are trying to sort of deal with the harm and raising awareness, the decision makers, you hear stories about how there have been tickets for Wimbledon, tickets for the FA Cup final, hospitality boxes. So when it comes to Parliament, Ronnie said today, something this morning, he said today that on the APPG, they're not paid any money to sort of promote, gambling harms, etc., etc. But there are MPs there that are taking money and sort of, free tickets, etc., etc. What are they going to do when it comes to vote? They're going to keep their hands down. So yeah, it's money. £14.5 billion industry. I'd imagine it contributes quite a bit to the Treasury, I would say. So that maybe there's your answer.
Has anyone got any questions in the room?
Hello. So with youth work, with what we obviously do, our biggest job is to give young people as much information, education informally, and then they can then make their own informed choices. That's like one of the fundamentals. And I guess my question for you would be, I'll rephrase it. So like, we've obviously created like the board game, we've done the peer education, but that's young people that are willing to engage with that conversation. And we can do the harm reductions and we can have that, but for those that, they turn around and go, oh, but that's not betting, or it's just a bit of fun, I'm doing it with my friends. Is there any advice that you would say to us to say back to young people, like what would be your biggest advice to help yourself or not do, I don't know if I'm phrasing this properly, because I know like what you said about like it's becoming, like if I was to go bet, it's now my problem and I have to look after myself. So how as youth workers could we better support young people to prevent, rather than giving them a harm reduction, how can we prevent them getting involved?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think in terms of education for young people, we have to make it clear to them that whether they're gaming, and the majority of obviously 11 to 16 or 11 to 18-year-olds are gaming, as we know, and there is a familiarisation with gaming and gambling. You know, the risk and reward element, the adrenaline rush, the buzz. I told you I hate bikes. Yeah, and the buzz, etc. So we have to educate them to just show them what problem gambling or gambling addiction actually looks like and what it feels like. And I think that's where Steve was saying about lived experience. You know, we can show them what it's like, you know, to walk in our shoes. And we have to educate from young. We have to educate from 11 years old, because this gaming and gambling correlation is growing absolutely huge. And as I said earlier, you know, when you've got, you know, young kids of 10, 11, 12, and they're spending £500 or £600, albeit not their own money, their parents' money, we have to educate them about how that feels and whether that can lead and manifest itself in terms of adult gambling. And I think it's taking that approach as well. You know, not judging them, you know, just explaining to them and raising awareness of what gambling addiction could look like for you in those future years.
Yeah, I think the whole issue as well is that gambling is normalised. It's seen as a bit of fun. It's promoted as a bit of fun. So when children are, you know, there's obviously the links to gaming and gambling, as you said. So when people move to 18, I think it's what everybody else does. But I think it's important that that these kids understand about the products, how addictive they are, how they're designed to be addictive. I would imagine that the majority of youngsters that are starting to gamble now are doing it online, rather than the traditional going into the betting shop, etc., etc. But I'm sure there's still some that would do that. But it's understanding, having an idea of what the big picture's all about. Understanding that as Kenny, what's his name? GVC, whatever his name was. 99% of our customers lose, is what he said. I wonder what happens to the other 1%. Probably get their accounts restricted. But it's making sure that the youngsters understand that the advertising strategies that the operators are using, how addictive the products are, so that they're making informed choices about gambling rather than just doing it because it's normalised. And I also think as well it's important that parents, it's not telling parents at 14, you know, at 14, 15, 16-year-olds, it's getting in at an earlier age, so that part of parents' toolkits of when they're 5, 6, 7 know that these electronic babysitters, these electronic games that they're playing, this is where it's all starting. It's normalised spending money online. You know, we've had a session this morning about online gaming and gambling. But the links then, you know, and there's no coincidence as well that I'm sure that our youngsters' data is being harvested so that it's being sold on. I think there was a story the other week that youngsters' data was breached as well. So I just think it's important that we're allowed parents and the children to make informed decisions so that they know the full picture of what's going on and recognising that gambling is an addictive product.
Do you have anything to add, Martin?
This is a global problem. This isn't just a problem in Scotland. I know we're concentrating in Scotland, but I mean, as campaigners and people who know in here, I mean, this is right from Australia, Finland, African countries now have been targeted big time through the advertising and the glamorising of gambling, and it's not glamorous. And 99% lose, another 1% do get closed down, and that's a fact. So they're making billions. It's all losses. Every penny that they're earning is losses. They've got that much money they don't know how to get to, and that's a fact. So they're making all these adverts. Get rid of the adverts and get rid of it out of sport would be a great couple of steps.
Kenny Alexander, by the way.
Kenny
Just come back to me. That's old age.
I think we've got another question from online.
Yep, so we've got a couple more questions. I'm going to combine two questions into one, if you don't mind. One question was kind of picking up on what you were saying, Tony, around advertising. Do you think there should be a total ban on gambling advertising and sponsorship on football tops, for example? So talking about advertising. And then on the other hand, what are some maybe things that can be put in place to negate that? So somebody commented saying cigarette packets, they show how smoking affects people, but there's nothing similar for gambling. Is there anything like that that can be implemented to increase that kind of harm reduction?
Actually, that's on bike, wasn't it? It's exactly the same thing with what I was talking about earlier, and it's right. cigarette there, it tells you what it can do to you. And that's what I've said earlier. That's what I want to see. I want to see the darker side and it advertised properly to show people exactly what gambling addiction to you and how harmful it can be to you. In terms of shirt sponsorship, definitely, I mean, gamble advertising, shirt sponsorship. I'll give you a story. I went to talk to Stoke City, one of my old clubs. I wanted to do basically a little mini documentary at the stadium, and we got in touch with Stoke. Peter Coates and the Coates family at Stoke were the same chairman who signed me in 1990, so he's still there. Obviously, his younger family has taken over the club. And we said, let's do some work around education awareness, let's do some work with the scholars, etc. And they basically didn't get back to us. They didn't want to know. And that's someone who I've had a relationship with over a period of time, yet they didn't want to get involved in anything to do with gambling awareness or education or raising awareness, etc. So when it comes to shirt sponsorship, they're obviously this conflict of interest in terms of their Bet365 being their operator or their sponsors. So I would like to see shirt sponsorship banned. It draws obviously millions and millions of young people into gambling when they go to the stadium with their dad. We're not just talking about shirt sponsorship, we're talking about advertising, perimeter fencing, we're talking about stadia betting, etc. I mean, it's bigger than people think. Because you go to any football club in the land now, and there'll be some kind of betting going on within that stadium. So shirt sponsorship, I would like to see banned. But more importantly for me is this advertising. I'm not against gambling advertising per se. I know one or two of the colleagues might be, and there might be some people in the room that say, ban gambling advertising completely. But I wouldn't say that. I would say have a balance. So you show one side, fair enough. You know, we have to understand that there are millions of people out there that do enjoy a bet from time to time. There's that social element. We can't ignore that and we can't exclude that. That's just a fact. It's a global issue. It's a form of entertainment for thousands and thousands of people. So let's not forget that. So I would like to see gambling balanced. So they show, yes, it's fun, it's entertainment, but on the other side, it can damage your health, it can damage families, it can have serious harmful impacts. So that's what I would like to see.
I'm going to have to disagree with you there a little bit, yeah. as you can imagine. I think gambling advertising should be banned completely. If I want to buy a pack of cigarettes, I know exactly where to go and get a pack of cigarettes. If I want to put a bet on, I know exactly where to go and put a bet on. And I also think in terms of when you're talking about advertising, you're talking about promotions. These free bets, these enhanced odds, they need to be banned as well. Because if someone's trying to give up gambling and they keep getting nudged, we haven't seen you for a few months, here's a free bet, here's a welcome back bonus, that's going to draw people back in as well. So that advertising ban needs to include the free bets and the incentives for people to bet as well. Going back to the football shirts, that's just a drop in the ocean. There's something called the whistle ban. What a load of nonsense that is. Because there's gambling advertising on just before, just after. There's 22 people running around with gambling advertising on their shirts. Some of them are under 18. You've got pitch side adverts. You've got gambling partners around the ground that they're sort of prompting you to bet with them, and then the club make money out of that as well. So, you know, in a nutshell, gambling advertising, in my opinion, I can only ever talk from my opinion, should be banned. If people want to bet and they can enjoy it, then let them do that. But let's do it without the free bets. Let's do it without the incentives, and let people who want to go to football, who want to enjoy football for what it is, not just have it bombarded in them, you know, every single minute of the day. And there's kids as well. You know, let's just not take away that gambling is illegal for under 18s. There's youngsters, you talk about people going to the match with their families. There's youngsters watching that, and it becomes normalised. And then that normalisation, you know, it goes into 16, 17-year-olds, etc., etc. They turn 18, and it's just part of what they do. And that all stems back to how it's been normalised. And I think if we got rid of the gambling advertising, you know, from football, if we could just ban football's relationship with gambling, that might be the start. But personally, I think gambling advertising should go completely.
Sorry, so just curiosity. Who thinks that gambling advertising should be banned per se completely?
Well, I'm going to put my hand up, obviously. There you go.
And who thinks it shouldn't? Yeah, at least I've got some friends.
Was that table for two?
Thanks so much, guys. Really, really appreciate you being part of today and coming and sharing your stories and everything like that and speaking about. So thanks very much to our panel. Thanks,